This week on Quality Digest Live, we explore lessons in leadership through failure and success.
Plus, simplifying global supply chains. That and more when we come back.
This episode of Quality Digest Live is brought to you by Mitutoyo America. Whatever your metrology challenges, Mitutoyo supports you from start to finish.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for March 25th, 2016.
Yeah, that's it. That's the year.
I'm in the right year. It's a good thing. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Adeld Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
Getting better every year. And I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. All righty, well, we begin the show this week with an illuminating story from our good friends at the International Organization for Standardization. ISO. The article, Things You Need to Know About Health-Centric Lighting, ran on ISO's website earlier this month, and it also appears in the March-April issue of ISO Focus magazine. We linked out to it in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Well, as the piece reveals, light has a major effect on the physical, mental, and emotional wellness of human beings. For this reason, ISO has formed a technical committee, ISO TC 274, Light and Lighting, which is now discussing how to create a platform for consistent language regarding product design, manufacturing, and testing, not to mention public safety and consumer protection within this area. Now, eventually, ISO intends to release an international standard on light and lighting technology. That's the reason why they're doing all this. The article actually takes the form of an interview between ISO Focus Editor-in-Chief Elizabeth Gacerowski-Denis and Professor Tongshin Mo, the director at the Smart and Health Lighting Research Center in Zhejiang, China. I think that's how you pronounce it. Zhejiang, maybe?
Sure,
okay, close enough. They talk about the trend towards human-centric lighting, or HCL as they call it, which is a technology that aims to match light characteristics with human circadian rhythms. And what they're saying here is that, obviously different light for different times of the day. In the morning, there's a brighter light that would be used to kind of wake you up and perk you up and get ready for the day. At night, you're still using light, but it's a much softer light.
It's the color temperature, I believe.
Exactly, incandescent, right? Cooler light that's going to get you more relaxed and ready for sleep. So, this is important. It really has an impact on your alertness and your ability to function and also be healthy. Now, it's interesting. This is expected to be nearly a $1 billion industry by 2020. So the need for further development in the field, helped along as it always is by forthcoming ISO standards, is pretty clear. It's crystal clear.
It's illuminating.
Well lit. Yeah, but no, I mean, it's a $1 billion business. So I mean, this is something that we're going to see increasingly, I think, built into homes, smart homes and things where, the lighting is going to just adjust to the time of day and to your own individual rhythms too. Everybody doesn't have the same day at 11 p.m. Some people are really still working and aren't going to go to sleep maybe until 2 or 3. Others at 11 a.m. are already asleep. So it will adjust to your own individual.
Yeah, light color has been a big topic of study for several years now. And different colors of light kind of have a different effect on the body, and so to be able to change, particularly if you could dynamically change it, that's kind of an interesting thought.
That's what they're exploring with this new technical committee, and there'll be a standard on this here in the next couple of years, so look out for that one.
Well, no big surprise here. Marketers are constantly trying to understand why people make the purchasing decisions they do. And of course, the holy grail of marketing is to completely understand how a particular market segment, let's say a particular age group or male or females between the age of 18 and 20, whatever it is, how a market segment responds to particular types of messages so that marketers, of course, can shape the message that they're putting out. Of course, the closer the match of the message to what the market wants to see, the more chance of making a sale or convincing somebody to vote for a particular presidential candidate. So, how do you do that? Well, in the past, before all the technology you have today, you simply ask people questions. I mean, it was done with surveys. I mean, I don't know if this ever happened to you, but I remember being in a mall and, hey, you want to take our marketing survey, and you go down a little room and they'd have a little focus group and they'd ask you a bunch of questions, usually related to a product or something. But the problem with this, according to Hilke Plasman in the article Brain Imaging Triggers Marketing Breakthroughs, is people often don't really know their own minds. And so one of the problems with surveys, particular product surveys, is either people aren't forthcoming, they don't really want to say what they feel about, a product or an advertisement or a political candidate. They don't want to say it because they're embarrassed or it's just too private, or they don't actually understand themselves what their feelings are towards something. So surveys can be a little iffy. Mm-hmm. But then technology comes along and you have stuff like, and this was used a lot in print advertising, eye tracking, where they sit you down in front of an ad, and as you're reading, or you open up a newspaper page or a magazine page, and a little piece of equipment tracks where your eye's going. Are you going to this ad, or are you going to the sentence? Where's your eye going on the page? So eye tracking was used. Also EEGs, electroencephalograms, where they actually looked at your brain waves and could maybe draw some conclusions about whether you're interested in something or not. So a lot of what they call neuromarketing going on now with technology. Now the latest is something called fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging. Now this is where they put you inside. I think we have a picture of it. This isn't being used a whole lot because obviously in order, that's how they do their marketing survey. We're just going to slide you inside this machine here. Hope you don't mind. It'll only take a few minutes, and there's going to be a lot of noise, and you're going to feel like you're, enclosed inside a coffin. But hope you don't mind this little test we're going to run on you.
And give you no money for it.
And you get no money for it. But what they're finding is that fMRI really allows researchers to look at the actual neural activity in the brain, and apparently this works pretty good. One study has concluded that fMRI was able to view certain brain activity that is directly tied to rewarding or positive feelings toward a brand. Now, what marketer wouldn't want that? Mm-hmm. So the question is all this technology and delving into what we, quotes, really want, is that a good thing? I mean, do we feel comfortable with it? Obviously, marketers feel, we'd love that, right? We'd love to know how to put our message out there for advertisers or products and get people to really buy what we're selling. Yeah. What do marketers, what do consumers think? Yeah. What do you think about as somebody really understanding what drives you?
It's hard because it's hard for me as a marketer to separate myself, to look at myself as me and not as me as an example of how to be marketed to, right, effectively. There's all sorts of proxy ways that this has been done over the course of time. You talk about some of the eye motion tracking, right, and even more brute force things like A/B splits that you do through general advertising. Yeah. And it's all intended to obviously see what turns people on and makes people take a response. But the question you're asking is, what do the consumers want out of this? Well, most consumers don't want marketing. Most people will say, I don't want marketing. But they really do. See, this is the thing. They really do.
They really do, as long as it's the right
kind of marketing at the right time and something that they really want. So when you say to them, when you couch it in the way of saying, well, we want to present offers to you that you really want, that you're really going to need and want to use at the right time, then people start saying, okay, interesting. I just got a mailer in the mail the other day for an inn, a B&B. Okay. My wife and I are going to go do some B&Bing this spring, and it was like, pretty good timing. They didn't know that, but what the heck, they just sent it. A lot of people go B&Bing in the early spring, so it's a good time anyway. But the mailer came, and it's like, we're going to use it. So, again, when it's served, how it's served, what the offer is, what the call to action is, all the things are really important. And if it's done right, most consumers do want it that way.
Well, that was my thought. Is I would have said pre-internet or even up to early internet, I would have said, people don't want that. But that was traditional advertising. Now with the internet, what we're finding is people don't mind advertising if it shows up, like you said, at the right time. And of course, with stuff like direct, what do they call it? Google's got a thing, marketing, not direct marketing, but the marketing programs where they know where you're at.
Yeah, they can serve an ad on your phone. They use GPS
based on where you've been before and that sort of stuff. And so they really are getting better at sending you an ad when you want it, which is really kind of backing into what these technologies are trying to do.
Because the technology is interesting. They're looking at what your brain waves are doing, what your brain is doing when you see something that turns you on, that you like, that you want to buy, that you have an interest in. And again, you may not know, you may not be able to say in a focus group, I like that because of this reason. I don't know, I just like it.
But they see the lights go off and they know, this person really liked this message.
And they're going to respond to it in some way. And again, why that happens is less important than the fact that it does for a marketer. Yeah. You don't need to know necessarily why, what it was in the ad that made it work. You need to know the ad worked.
Yeah, and that's about it.
That's good enough, because then you
Yeah.
can rerun that ad and try to rerun it at the same time in the same kind of way, and you're going to get hopefully the same response. It's about controlling your response.
Yeah, interesting article. There's actually some interesting links in that article to some other studies, so go out and check that out. It's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, it's marketing and being able to take the stuff that we create. I mean, all of you out there are not necessarily marketing for a living, but you're working for companies that are putting stuff out there. It's important to know how consumers or users, customers are going to get to your stuff, I think. So that's a good thing to think about.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Dirk. Alrighty, well, leading your team through failure and success. That's the name of an article by Mike Figliolo, and it appeared in yesterday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Well, Mike Figliolo, we were just talking about it before the show. Mike Figliolo is a true leader. I mean, he's a leader in the broadest sense. He's a combat veteran. He's a business trainer. He's a very well-published author. We've published him in the Quality Digest Daily for a couple of years now. So given all that background, you understand that his advice really comes from a grounded place. He comes from a place of realism, practicality. So he's a guy that really understands how to, boots on the ground is the term, really understands when the rubber meets the road, what you need to do to lead a team in the right way. Well, here in this piece, he talks about leading a team during good times and bad times. And you must really be prepared to deal with all kind of contingencies and realities when you're a leader. I mean, we know failure happens, right? I mean, we all plan for success, and we know that failure is out there too, and it's part of the price you pay to get to where you ultimately have to go. So, you're aware of that. And there's some hidden benefits to failure too that I'm going to talk about actually as I get into the story a little bit, which I thought was interesting. He made several interesting points here in the story. One is that you really need to be individualistic in how you manage your people. And that's no surprise. We've heard that for a long period of time, is that, everybody isn't the same. I mean, and the way you reward people isn't always the same. For instance, you may have a team member who does a great job, and you may say, I want to reward that person. Well, you need to think really carefully about what that person's habits and tendencies and desires are before you just give them a reward. For instance, you may have a person that's really introverted, and they may do a great job working as part of the team, and they may take the lead on something, and they may do something that's really great to move that project forward. And you say, well, I want to reward them by letting them get up in front of the next group meeting and say what they did. And they're like, I don't want to talk in front of 50 people, I'm an introvert. Well, that's not the appropriate reward for a person who's like that. So understanding who those people are and what they want and what turns them on is really important. The other thing he talks about here, which I thought was really interesting, is that you handle a success and a failure differently based on whether it's a team or an individual. For instance, in an individual basis, if there's a success, you want to focus on an individual. You want to try to give an individual as much props as you can if there's a successful outcome. On the other side of that, if there's a negative outcome, if there's a failure that you're trying to work your way through, you really want to have the entire team be involved. And you want to say, okay, what did we do wrong? What can we do better as a team? How did that happen? You do your postmortem and you look at what went on. Well, how can we all do better? So again, it's individual. If it's a success, if it's a failure, you want to make that a little bit broader. That's an interesting way of doing it. Finally, he mentions really this idea that risk is inherent in failure, and it's inherent in success too. That many times, things don't happen the right way, and that you don't want it to really, you want to have a better outcome than you had, right? And you maybe want to cast blame, but you really can't, because what happens is you have to encourage the risk taking, because if you don't take a risk, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think that many times what happens is leaders tend to focus on the negative outcomes, and they don't cheer people for taking a chance. I mean, ultimately, business is built on risk-taking and being able to kind of have the confidence to say, well, listen, I think, and this is personal here, for a team member, I think this is going to work. I think this is something I've looked at, and I think it's really an excellent chance. We're going to launch this product, we're going to launch this service, we're going to tweak this, we're going to do that, whatever it may be. I'm going to own it. Now, when somebody does that, even if it doesn't work, it's a success because that person has demonstrated a lot of initiative, and you're going to get a lot out of that by encouraging that person to be that way rather than shutting them down. So failures have a lot of benefit, I mean, if you look at it the right way, and if you can extract from that the ability to take a chance, to take a risk, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but the idea that you did it and that you encourage your team to do it is really, really powerful. And again, it's leadership, and that's what Figliolo is talking about in this piece. Really interesting the way he approaches that. And I think you can see in this piece and in his writing in general, the kind of leader he is. I've never met Mike, we've had him on the show via Skype, but you can see he's got that very very can-do attitude. As a combat vet. You see where that comes from. But I mean, very, very practical approach to how you take teams and how you lead them through success and failure. So it's really well thought out piece, I thought.
Yeah, good piece by Mike.
Yeah, definitely. So check that one. As always, we always say is below the page you're going to have a lot of links to the stories we're covering today. So check them out and read Mike Figliolo's article, Kelly's article. We're going to talk to Kelly later. And Dirk's article right now from Tom Cutler.
Yeah. Well, most of you probably know what a Kanban is. For those of you who don't, Kanban is a system for what you would call pulling parts into your production system as opposed to parts being pushed into a production system. It's a pull system. And typically, the traditional Kanban system uses a physical system. It's cards. You take a Kanban card and it goes back to wherever the stockroom or whatever. It's an indication that the line now needs more parts, and then the parts come out. And it's a pull-driven system to bring parts out to the line or wherever when they're needed. Now, this works pretty well generally in, let's say, high volume, high mix. They tend to break down, in high volume, high mix, as well as low volume, high mix environment. So the key word there is high mix, where there's a lot of variable customer demand, and there's frequent changeovers, and there's limited line of sight. In those types of situations, what might make more sense is something called an electronic Kanban system. And an electronic Kanban system is just basically what it sounds like. It's with an e-Kanban, the signaling, rather than being done with physical cards, Kanban cards, it's done via, let's say, text message or email or some other electronic means. And we've got a little slide up there that kind of shows the idea. And the nice thing about it is that with a physical Kanban system like cards, you're kind of limited to working within a physical plant. And it doesn't work so well, or almost not at all, when you have to go to external vendors or plants, because how do you pass Kanban cards? So typically what happens is you may have a physical plant that has a Kanban system within. It may work really great, but there's no Kanban system or e-Kanban system between that plant and its suppliers. So now you're back to your old ERP system or some other system where it's basically a push system, or it's a kind of an elongated system where purchasing sees are getting low on parts, and they make a phone call to the vendor, they order parts, and blah, blah, blah. But it's not demand driven, it's not pull driven. And an e-Kanban really works like that. It's kind of dependent upon what we would call interconnected Kanban loops. And Thomas Cutler writes about this in his article. What was it called?
It's right there.
Complex Global Supply Chain
Simplified. There it is.
Sorry about that. Lost the name of it. And so with an e-Kanban system, you can have internal and external e-Kanban loops. And an internal Kanban loop might be, let's say, between assembly and sub-assembly lines. Your traditional thing we were just talking about, that you can do even with cards. Might also exist between production lines and supermarkets in the case of e-Kanbans. An external Kanban would include, let's say, those between a plant and a distribution center, or between, let's say, a raw material warehouse and external suppliers. All of this really enables you to implement a pull system throughout your entire supply chain, and not just in your plant or in individual plants. So it's worth taking a look at that article. I mean, you haven't thought of e-Kanbans or really understand kind of the value of them. Thomas Cutler makes a pretty good case for them in here. Obviously, he works for a company that sells, hey, no big surprise, an e-Kanban system. But there are a lot of systems out there that do this, and there are some real advantages in being able to set up a Kanban system, not only in your own plant, but with external suppliers and external vendors, and even external organizations or parts of your own organization. So some real value in there. So it's interesting reading. Take a look. Yep.
Yeah, it's flow. It's all about flow. I mean,
all about flow,
This
yep.
is
It's
really
all
a
about
lean
pull.
system.
Yep.
Yep. And then that's the great insight there is that you have push and you have pull systems, and the American system has been very push
yeah.
oriented, and this is really a pull system,
Yep.
and intended to be that. So it's good stuff. Cutler always has some interesting things to say. So check it out. Thanks, Dirk. Okay, well, it's been a few weeks, but we're happy now to welcome back one of our most popular columnists, I think, to the show, Kelly Graves. Kelly uses his training in psychology to help organizations improve in management and interpersonal communication. And his latest article, Us versus Them, Inc., you can see it right there, appeared in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Kelly, is again, he really talks about psychology. It's a good opportunity to look at organizational structure in a different way. And in this one, we're talking about organizational infighting and how it can be destructive. And basically, we talk about what that us versus them philosophy is responsible for, even more than competition or organizational losses. What it's responsible for is really causing losses in an organization. So, Kelly, we're joined now by you. Thank you for being on with us.
Good to be back.
Hey, Kelly, good to see you again. All right.
Thank you. All right, so tell us about that. So tell us why organizational infighting, as you said in your piece, is more destructive than other businesses or even market forces in terms of maybe hurting organizations.
It's the case that when you have infighting, I've been in meetings, for instance, I'll give you an example. I've been in meetings where the CEO says, we want to do X, Y, and Z, and you can tell on the people's faces it's like, no, not going to happen. I'm not going to do that. Engineering and say marketing are going to argue, and they're not going to follow that. And so you have this finger pointing, this envy for the other department or the other people. Maybe they slighted you 3 months ago or 6 months ago. They didn't support your project. So it doesn't matter if this project is better for the organization, you're going to slight them back. And so you have this envy and this chaos. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I see with 90+% of my clients is that you just have this infighting instead of let's focus on what's out there and not us.
Yeah, conflict, right? I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. Right. You what I like about your writing always is that you're very balanced in what you present, and in this one, you offer a balanced look at conflict because conflict isn't always all bad, right? I mean, conflict can be good. How can conflict be good in an organization?
It could be good because when people are in conflict, all they're doing is trying to communicate with each other. Mm-hmm. They're just not very good at it, okay? And so if you look at communication as not a good or a bad thing, or if we look at conflict as not a good or a bad thing, it's really just somebody's attempt to try to get their point of view across. And so if you break it down in terms of what kind of conflict are we having? Is this a relationship conflict between you and me as individuals, or are we at odds about how do we want to approach, a project? And that's where a lot of the challenges come in, and that's where, I put the 3 kinds of conflict: the task, what we're going to do, the process, how we're going to do it, and then the relationship. And oftentimes, when you break it down between what is the real issue here, you look closer at conflict, you can figure out that, I don't have to like you to respect the work that you do. And a lot of times I've had that happen where 2 people don't get along, and but they really respect the other's work. And so it's like, okay, we're not going to go have a beer, but still, when I give you my data, I know that you're going to do everything in your power to do your piece with that.
And it sounds like a lot of that boils down to either communication or a buildup of a culture where everybody understands what the goal is and everybody's striving for that goal regardless of whether they get along with each other or even agree on the process of how to get there. Mm-hmm. We can work with each other on getting to that goal if we all agree on what that goal is. I mean, is that part of it, is just establishing what we're trying to do?
That's a huge part of it. If, most companies are in such a hurry to get the job done today. In fact, I've had CEOs say, we don't have time to do it right. We just have to do it. And it's because they're behind the 8 ball. And so most companies, if they would get their people together and say, okay, this is our overall objective, and this is how your department's objective fits within the organization, and then this is what we need you, Dirk, to do, they would be much better off. Or for instance, If three of us are debating a project of some sort, how we want to approach something, I might lobby very hard for that, and people might see that and say, God, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of anger. And it's really not anger, it's passion. Where it gets bad is when we cross the line and we start pointing fingers, or I start saying dirt, blah,
Right,
blah,
right.
blah, okay? But conflict can be very good. In fact, it's necessary. When people are at odds, it doesn't mean that they hate each other. What's happened is how we've grown up, fighting with our parents, fighting with our siblings, fighting with others. Conflict, it emerges within us and it creates all this anxiety. And so as soon as somebody raises their voice, let's say we're in a meeting, somebody raises their voice, instantly I go to 8 years old when things were bad in my household.
Right,
okay?
right. Yeah.
And so I'm already rattled. So a person that was raised in an environment where there was a lot of yelling in the house, where debate was natural, they don't see that as a bad thing. They might see that as, wait a minute, debate, that's how I get my point across to you. We debate it back and forth. It's not about you and me. And so to go back to your earlier question, we have to teach people, what is debate? How are we going to approach these problems and these challenges? So what they need to do is have two conversations, one about the topic, but also how are we going to achieve the dynamic on how we're going to get along. Conflict doesn't have to be bad. And so when a CEO or whoever's facilitating a meeting, when they see a person shy off or shut down or be quiet or kind of close off in one way or the other, that's where you have to stop the conversation right then and really start talking about how are we going to solve our problems. Because if we don't get this problem solved now, it's going to manifest in everything else we do.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that debate doesn't have to be personal. You can debate honestly and support your positions without casting aspersions of the other person.
Right.
Maybe you can help some of our politicians talk about that. I don't know. Maybe.
They're beyond help. That's a whole different game.
Well, but let me ask you this though, seriously. So how does a manager, in the couple minutes we have left, how does a manager who wants to encourage debate, but how does that manager know when it's turning from good conflict to bad conflict? What do you need to be aware of?
I think that, in my experience, is one, catch it quick. And so I think managers know when it's gone from good to bad. The problem is they don't already have the tools in their tool bag. And so they let it go. And they figure this is just normal. John and Sam always fight. And this is just how it is. Organizational cultures, we were talking about that just a few seconds ago. Sometimes they're just argumentative and they're so unhealthy they think this is just how life is. So what a manager can do is, one, really study conflict instead of running from it. Buy some books, study, look at my website or look at, other people who really specialize in conflict and know what it is. And it's like, instead of running from it, let's look to it. And the first thing is, just in the simple article is, are we having a task conflict? Are we having a process conflict? Or are we having a relationship conflict? Just narrowing it down between those three are going to help you talk to people through it. In fact, in my years of doing this, almost 2 decades, and I've sat in on hundreds and hundreds of people, whether it was groups or individuals, dyads that didn't like each other, and over 90% it was misperception. I thought you said this, I thought you meant it when you said it this way. And so all we need to do is really dissect the conversation and say what was really meant here. And oftentimes that frustration towards the other person is so deep that it goes back for years. And so that's where you really have to go back and figure out, okay, is this a today issue or is this, a chronic issue that we've had with us for 5 or 6 years?
They've got a history with each other, right?
Yeah, and that's usually when I get the call is, okay, we have problems and we've had these problems for 7, 8, 9 years. Now can you come? Can you come fix it? Yeah. You got 38 minutes. It's like,
No problem.
Well, Kelly, thanks for joining us. We're kind of out of our time today, but we'll have you back on. We'll talk about more of these issues. It's always good talking to you and kind of rolling up our sleeves a little bit, looking at the psychological underpinnings of conflict in organizations. Always really important to look at that.
Nice to be back.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right. Well, thanks, Kelly. Well, that is our show for this week. But before we go, we want to thank today's sponsor. Mitutoyo Corporation is the world's largest provider of measurement and inspection solutions. offering the most complete selection of machines, sensors, systems, and services with a line encompassing CMMs, vision, form, and finishing measurement machines, as well as precision tools and instruments and metrology data management software. Mitutoyo's nationwide network of metrology centers and support operations provides application, calibration service, repair, and educational programs to ensure that there are more than, what is that, Dirk?
6,000.
6,000 metrology products.
A lot of them.
Will deliver, I couldn't believe it, will deliver measurement solutions for their customers. For more information, visit mitutoyo.com or click on the banner ad just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
There you go. 6,000 products.
6,000. I couldn't believe it when I saw it.
They've got a lot of stuff.
That's right.
Great equipment, too. So that is the end of today's show. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Kelly, once again, thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Kelly, for
Always
being
fun
here.
having you on the show. And we will all see you at next week.
That's right. Next week at Quality Digest Live, and we'll be here on Monday for another big week at QDD. So
there you go.
Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you then.
So long.